Hello everyone, welcome back for another edition of our Sky Tonight. My name is Seth Mayo, I'm the Curator of Astronomy for the LOWELL Planetarium, and for this week we are covering the dates of November 9th through November 15th. And in this episode we're going to look at the rising of the Pleiades star cluster and how it's great to see for this month. We'll look again at the morning sky and the really nice position of the moon and a couple planets. And we'll look at an interesting opportunity for a comet sighting in the morning as well. So let's take a look. One of my favorite objects in the sky to look out for right now is the small, tight grouping of very bright stars that you can see just above the east not long after sunset, called the Pleiades star cluster. And November is the best time of the year to see the cluster since you can see it for the entire night from sunset to sunrise. And every time I notice Pleiades in the evening, I'm always reminded that winter is right around the corner. And the cluster is actually part of a prominent wintertime constellation. If we move time forward just a little bit to a bit later in the evening, you'll find that the Pleiades star cluster is part of a group of stars that form the constellation Taurus the Bull. And just below the cluster, you'll see a V shape of stars that forms the nose and head of the bull. Here are the tips of the bull's horns. So the cluster actually represents the shoulder or back of this large bull, of course, one of the signs of the zodiac. Speaking of names for this very famous star cluster, I know I've been calling it Pleiades, which is the official name for it, but many of you probably know it as the Seven Sisters, named after the seven daughters of the Greek mythological titan named Atlas. And Atlas and his wife, a sea nymph named Pleione, had seven daughters, at least some of the daughters he had, and these stars represent them. And even though it's called the Seven Sisters, most people, including myself, only see 6 stars. You may be able to see 7 if you have really good eyesight and in a very dark and clear location to see that many. Some people can see even more than 7, but most of us can see 6 stars. A couple of my other favorite names for this cluster come from various other cultures. One is in Hawaii, where they call it Makali'i, and the rising of the stars of Makali'i signals a new year, a change of seasons. The other name that probably all of you have heard of, surprisingly, is the Japanese name. In Japan, it is called Subaru. That's, of course, where that famous car company gets its name from. But the actual name in Japanese means unity, because the stars are very close together, and they represent being close and being unified. And the logo for the Subaru Corporation has a meaning because, of course, the logo represents that star cluster. But if you look carefully at the logo, you'll find 5 dimmer stars, which represents 5 previous separate companies that eventually formed into one company, which the bright star represents, that is now the Subaru Corporation that you know today that produces those vehicles. And if you want to enhance your view, binoculars are a good choice because they have a wider field and it allows you to see more of the stars of the cluster at once in your view. But if we zoom into this cluster, we will see it is a fascinating place, and we'll go right to it. This cluster is about 430 light years away. It's actually one of the closest objects like this to Earth, and the closest Messier object. It's called M45 or Messier 45. This wonderful magnified view reveals that the cluster has many more than just 6 or 7 stars, but actually hundreds, if not thousands of them. And this is called an open cluster. So the stars aren't gravitationally bound too closely together. The stars will actually slowly drift away, and they're relatively young. These are blue, very hot stars that are living very quick lives because they burn through all their fuel in their cores very, very quickly. Unlike our own sun, which is a yellow star that burns a bit more slowly because it's not as hot. These stars all formed in the same location generally about 100 million years ago, which is not that long ago for stars. So this is a relatively new cluster that is slowly drifting from each other. and it provides a beautiful group that we can see at this time. Now, one of my favorite images I fall back on very often when it comes to Pleiades is this picture here. It is from the Palomar Observatory in California, and it reveals in stunning detail those blue hot stars of the cluster that you can see with your naked eyes. Those are the really big bright ones. But then you also notice this kind of bluish dust, and it does seem like that dust is part of the cluster, but it actually is not. The dust is just in between us and the cluster, and it looks like they're associated, but it's just a coincidence that they sort of are in front of the stars, making it like it's one complex of dust and stars together. And even though they're not associated with each other, from our point of view, it makes for a wonderful image that you see here. This week, the early morning before sunrise steals the show again. And if you're looking towards the east, you'll see three prominent solar system objects. Most noticeable is probably going to be the thin crescent moon, the waning crescent that we see here. This is the morning of the 10th. But below that, just near the eastern horizon, you're going to find two planets. The one closest to the sun here is the planet Mercury. And on the 10th, Mercury is at what's called greatest western elongation. That means that the planet is furthest west of the sun and highest that it gets from it until it starts to sink back into the sun's glare as it rounds its orbit around our nearest star. And so right now it's a good time to see it. You got to be careful still because Mercury is close to the sun. You don't want to have the sun's light kind of enter your eye, but if you do look carefully in the 5 to 6 o'clock time frame, you may see that just above the east, and after the 10th it will start to sink down towards the sun. It moves very quickly. Mercury is the speediest planet in the solar system. And we can see the brightest planet from Earth, and that's the planet Venus. Just above it we find here, and even with some of the glow of the sun, Venus will still shine for some time, which is nice. Venus is also starting to set into the sun's glare. And if we move past the morning of Tuesday the 10th, you find the moon will get closer to those planets. We move on to the 11th on Wednesday, even thinner crescent, then the 12th, and then by the 13th, that morning, you'll find a very, very thin crescent moon between Mercury and Venus. And then by the weekend, the moon will move below those planets and into the sun's glare that we see here. An interesting object to pay attention to is another potential comet that could become visible in our southeastern sky in the early morning in November and December. And this was brought to our attention by some of our listeners. We're thankful of that, about this comet called Erasmus, named after the astronomer who discovered it very recently, actually back in September of this year, with an observatory called Atlas, which actually helped discover another comet that was seen, at least through telescopes, earlier in the year called Comet Atlas. And here's a picture that I took of it, actually a small time lapse of it while it was still visible, at least through telescopes. It never got really as bright as we hoped. And of course, there was another comet later in the year called Neowise this past summer that was really good. And here's a picture of that through one of our telescopes. And that really was nice, could be seen with the naked eye even near the Big Dipper. But this upcoming comet may be the last potential one we could see for the year 2020, and so it's been a very nice cometary year. And this comet is located right now inside the constellation called Crater the Cup. It's not the brightest constellation, but it's there. And not far from it is the constellation here that may see a little bit better, called Corvus the Crow. So I'll put up their outlines. There's Crater the Cup there, and we will put up their pictures as well. So at the time that we are doing this is for the 10th of November, the comet is located inside Crater the Cup, and what it is doing is it's actually moving closer to the sun. It's nearing what's called perihelion, and that actually happens on January 21st of 2021, when the comet will get closer to the sun and actually brighten. So as we get closer to that time, the comet will slowly brighten, and move closer to the sun in our sky. So from even Tuesday morning, you'll see it actually move pretty quickly, or at least if you followed it. You'll notice it moving out of crater. This is on 11th, 12th, 13th, and then by the weekend, it will actually start to enter into Corvus the Crow. Through this entire time, again, you probably won't even be able to see it even through a small telescope. It's that dim right now. But there may be a chance, if things work out just right, that it could be visible through binoculars as we get more into November and maybe even into December. That would be interesting for that to happen. And if it is visible, you have to really pay attention to it early in the morning before it gets too close to the sun, and then the sun's glare would make it really difficult to see, and that would add to the light of the sky. So you want to hopefully try to look for it if it brightens up in the November, really December time frame. But there's no guarantees. Comets are very, very unpredictable. It could never get very bright at all, or it could get kind of bright. We will see. We don't expect this to be really bright, visible to the naked eye, but there is a chance binocular viewing could be possible. So we just kind of have to wait and see for this comet. But it's another exciting opportunity to really see some ancient solar system objects move through our sky. So stay tuned. We are so glad to have you back for another edition of The Sky Tonight. Thanks for tuning in. And again, please check out our LOWMAN Planetarium if you feel like visiting us in person and safely. And as always, take care and happy stargazing.